Hey, Stephanie, thanks so much for joining today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Can we just start with a little intro on your part of what your background is, what you're doing now?
Sure, Stephanie Winn, licensed marriage and family therapist. I've been in the mental health field for 10 years. And for most of that, I was just a therapist doing, sort of the typical career route for a lot of therapists working in agencies with more sort of high acuity populations, then working with a more kind of general population, anxiety, depression, and relationship issues. And then everything started to change around 2020, the moment I learned about detransitioners and also had some of my long held beliefs challenged by events in the culture. And in 2021 is when I started having a more public presence through Twitter, now X, and blogging and launching my podcast, which is called You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist, which launched in 2022. And my sort of claim to fame is that I'm one of those rare therapists that's willing to put their neck out there and say, hey, what we're doing is wrong when it comes to trans and kids. And this whole idea of gender affirming care is not evidence based, is not based on sound psychological principles, and is actively harming people. And, I was one of those people, I was very progressive and open minded. So when I was first taught about this idea of trans kids, I believed that it must have rested on an evidence base, and I was open to it and working in that affirmation model for a few years, just noticing though in the back of my mind that there was something that felt not right about it. I was seeing that, these were neurodivergent young people with a lot of trauma, with same-sex attraction that they hadn't explored, all the sort of issues that gender critical people have known for a while. So anyway, my claim to fame is that I sort of, got a lot of attention when I came out for that, both positive and negative. I had complaints made against my license, which I talked about in episode 11 of my podcast with Helen Joyce. And since then, I have had the fortune of connecting with a lot of incredible people. I became part of a documentary, No Way Back, The Reality of Gender Affirming Care. So it was a real honor to be featured in that documentary and to be able to represent that film to so many wonderful people. I've also gotten involved with medical ethics organizations and so gender related issues in the mental health field, as well as medical ethics in general, have been a big focus on my podcast. I've talked to a lot of detransitioners um, and ROGD parents, but I like to talk about other issues as well. But it's funny, once you start talking about such hot button issues, there are a lot of people who just won't talk to you about other things because they're afraid of being associated with you. So I've
Mhm.
ended up kind of pigeonholed in that world.
Well, I really admire the work that you've done and you are doing. I congratulate you with that. And part of the reason I'm bringing you on is just to show that story of someone who can stand up and witness to the truth. I'm really interested in your personal experience of being someone who was coming in very open-minded on this issue. Can you talk a little bit about how exactly you came to change your opinion?
Yeah, well, I think I sort of prided myself on being one of the more progressive individuals within the fairly mainstream company that I worked for as a mental health therapist. It became sort of my niche, and there was even a point during my work there where a colleague who specialized in polyamory and kink and trans and all the sort of fringe populations decided to hand off like half her caseload to me when she left the company. So there was sort of this, combination of what I was attracting and what was being projected onto me that I ended up working with, sort of fringe and marginal populations. I believe it was 2017 that I went to the training that was recommended by the company. And this is a bizarre thing because the company I worked for was not particularly progressive. I feel like their underlying MO was like, let's make money and not get sued. Let's work with all the insurance companies. Let's become a reliable referral for doctors who are looking to refer their patients. Let's do everything by the books and be trustworthy, very middle of the road company. And so when they put on a training in gender affirming care, looking back, it's kind of a little bewildering. But you assume that these are credible teachers. You have professionals standing up in front of 150 master's level clinicians teaching us this is a new standard of care and it has this supposed research base. But we were being taught the lines of that you should say to parents under certain circumstances, would you rather have a dead daughter or a live son? And, that if you don't block, we were being given the whole rationale for why supposedly the best course of action is to identify these supposedly trans kids early on, prevent them from going through the so-called wrong sex puberty, which is supposedly traumatic, and all of that kind of stuff. And, I think some questions were raised, but I think there was kind of a chilling effect in the room. And so the way I took it at first was like, I just wanted to, I wanted to prove that I was a reliable, competent, open-minded clinician. And the fact that trans, non-binary, and all that was being lumped in with the LGB, well, I wanted to be supportive of my gay clients, right? So there was really no sense at first of the seriousness of the issue and the actual lack of the evidence base for making major medical decisions. And so, like I said, from about 2017 to 2020, I worked with a variety of people, but including trans-identified people, and at various stages in their transitions too. Now, I'm thankful that I never went on to the next level training. There was a pressure to go to the next level training where they taught you how to write those WPATH letters. According to the WPATH Standards of Care 7, this client meets criteria for blah, 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 and I recommend this surgery and this blah, 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 blah. Like at the time, I felt like I should go. But in retro, and I thought that it was some kind of laziness or moral failing on my part that I didn't go. And now I look back and I was feeling resistance because there was something that felt wrong about putting myself in a position as a therapist, somebody whose job is to work with the mind, that I was putting myself in a position to actually recommend someone work with a medical procedure that's life altering. So I didn't do that. I didn't write those letters. Thank goodness. But in that position, I did get to witness, you name it, the girl with a terrible trauma history who suddenly decides she's a boy, the girl who seems shy and awkward and autistic, who's been bullied and neglected, who suddenly decides she's a boy, and all the trends that we've been talking about in the gender critical community. But it really wasn't until I actually heard about detransitioners, and that was a pivotal moment to me. And that's where it baffles me that other people don't always have the same reaction I did. Because for me, it was like the moment I learned that there is this population of people who have been through that and regretted it, I felt very curious and concerned, and like I had a moral obligation to learn about the issue. So I did a deep dive. And I think what really shocks me is that there are therapists who don't have that reaction. Like, how could you not? I think that's sort of a point of division within our community. So, as soon as I started learning about detransitioners in 2020, I wanted to learn their stories, and I became horrified that my field had anything to do with this. So that was really the turning point for me, was learning about detransitioners. And at the time, I didn't know any other therapists talking about it. I mean, even up to the point where I was getting ready to release my own podcast, I hadn't even heard at that point about GenSpect or Gender a Wider Lens podcast. I did not know other therapists talking about this issue. I was just a therapist whose view of other therapists was influenced by the Portland community and by woke Facebook groups, which were that was another thing that kind of piqued me. It was like seeing how therapists were treating other therapists in these groups. They had just been completely taken over by social justice warrior bullies and become toxic and unproductive. It really wasn't until I launched my podcast that I even started to meet other therapists who shared my concerns.
So have you had any success with convincing other people of your point of view, other therapists? And if so, how do you do that?
Well, that's a good question. And you're talking about like through one-on-one conversation. I never know how my work is going to influence people. I've certainly had people tell me that my work has been influential because they've listened to my podcast or read my blog, things like that. In terms of one-on-one conversations with people, have I taken anyone who was like a true believer and had them walk away a turf? I don't know that I have. I know that I've had various interactions where I've sort of like tested the waters with someone, throwing out a term here or, something there, and then they start to open up to you that they have concerns. And I think for some of those people, who are very careful how they express their concerns, they're like, by all means, everyone should be free to be who they are. I'm not telling anyone, not to be who they are. But isn't it kind of crazy that we're like giving people these life-altering drugs before their brains have fully matured? Like, I think I've created space for people to say those things out loud who maybe aren't accustomed to saying them out loud. And who knows where they've gone after those conversations. Maybe it's empowered them to do more research or look at other sources. I do, however, work a lot with people who come to me, whether it's counseling clients or coaching clients who want help with their self-expression. So there's kind of that, that ripple effect of the work of helping other people figure out how to find their voices with their loved ones. I will say, on a more personal note, I think my mom has been impacted by me on this issue because my mom's a lifelong Democrat, and she's elderly, and you know how it is with 80 something Democrats, right? They don't understand how much their party has changed. So I don't know that my mom would understand this issue if she weren't my mom and therefore interested in listening to my podcast. So at least my mom's listening. Yeah, I don't know. If there's anyone else who feels like I've changed their mind on this, please feel free to reach out.
So, in the process of speaking your mind, witnessing to the truth, what was it? Just like an on-off switch that you just woke up one day and you said, "Okay, I'm going to go for it," or was it a gradual process of overcoming fear, growing in courage, reflecting on what are going to be the professional implications of each step, and then how to navigate that? Help us understand that process.
Definitely more of a gradual process for sure. I mean, I'd say the inner shift in terms of my own beliefs on the subject were a more dramatic, like, oh, something's not right here. But the process of testing the waters of expressing myself, which, by the way, I mean, we're talking mostly online, right? We're talking like, shifting from being in a woke Facebook group for therapists to saying things to eventually being kicked out of that group to joining Twitter and having 100 followers and then 1,000 and then 10,000. And, I think as I was launching my podcast too, I was really just kind of experimenting with expression, which is something that I recommend to people who turn to me for help expressing themselves. And I think part of the problem is that one analogy I've used is like the sandbox versus the racetrack. The sandbox is a place where you can play when you're in preschool, right? And the worst thing that can happen from your experimentation is someone gets sand in their eye and cries, or someone gets a toy stolen that they were hoping to play with. Like, no big deal, right? And we all need our figurative sandboxes in life to learn new things, because when you're learning new things, you are sloppy, uncoordinated, and unskilled. And the best lives are, full of lifelong learning processes where you've established your skill set in some areas, but you're still growing in others. Now, the racetrack, that's the performance zone, right? That's where you have practiced your skills. Now you have to put them to the test. The stakes are on, the pressure's on and the stakes are high. And so most of us in our adult lives feel like a lot of things are a racetrack, right? You have to have already mastered certain skills because you need them to function. You don't have a lot of room to be messy. But when it comes to expressing yourself in new ways, you need some of the freedom of the sandbox. You need the stakes to be lower. So that's, I would say, one of the tools that I talk about when helping other people find their voice. And so for me, I think I've I've been somewhere in between like sandbox mode and racetrack mode in terms of, dipping my toes and testing the waters, trying little things, feeling emboldened here, having repercussions there. I wouldn't say that I'd repeat all the same choices that I've made in risking self-expression, because it's certainly come at a cost to my stress and health, to my work-life balance. But I think, if you go back and listen to like early episodes of my podcast, I was stepping a lot more gingerly. I was imagining that I was speaking to an audience full of people who were, some of them probably just as woke as the people I was accustomed to. So I was very careful. And, for example, like in my first 5 episodes, asking Colin Wright, so is it possible for humans to change sex? Is it? Or like, putting myself out on a limb at the time in episode 3, talking to an ROGD mom saying, I'm just going to put this out there and people can call me what they want, but I think it's a better life outcome to accept your body and leave it intact than to permanently alter it. There, I said it, come at me. Like I remember kind of being like that when I first started expressing myself. And now that I have a certain following and a large block list as well and have been through the ringer, I think I'm a lot more comfortable expressing myself. It just takes practice.
Well, I have to say you express yourself very well.
Thank you.
So another dilemma I'm facing, because I would say I would put myself in the category of where you were initially, of trying to play in the sandbox, maybe take a few steps out on the racetrack, take maybe a practice run or something. Although with the internet, it seems like everything's a racetrack because once it's out there, it's out there. But the dilemma I'm navigating is I don't. I mean, I think that every human has an obligation to speak the truth and strive for good. But I don't. I don't want to do it out of just a desire for personal notoriety or fame. And I can see that as being a possible temptation in my attempts to speak the truth. How do you, if that thought occurred to you? If so, how do you navigate that?
Well, I think you have to go through your own like initiation with fame. I mean, that's a strange way of saying it, but that's the way it's coming to my mind right now because I'm grappling with my own relationship with fame. And I just within the last couple months have gotten to a point where I'm like, I do not want to grow anymore. Like, I have been on a trajectory of trying to grow my podcast and my general work so that I have multiple income streams. And partly that's a security issue because ever since I came into the limelight, I have felt that my license is at risk.
Mm-hmm.
So there's partly like I need to survive. So I need to make sure I have a backup plan. So if I'm not able to practice therapy anymore, uh, I would like to be well known enough that coaching clients are
Mm-hmm.
going to find me and they're going to want to talk to me and they don't care if I've lost my license because they know what I'm about. Or, the fact that this work is so labor intensive and so emotionally taxing, plus I have a chronic illness, it's like there is certainly a motivation to have enough of a reach that there can be multiple income streams. But what I've realized through my own process is that um, if you're gonna be famous, it's much better to be rich. And if like like you need to be wealthy level famous to be able to pay for the support structures. Um, but I think I just had to go through my own learning process and that doesn't directly answer your question because what you're talking about is more motivational. It's more like what is driving the desire to be seen, right? For me, I think, yeah, there's always that element of ego in it, but I think that doesn't have to be at odds with one's altruism in the sense that for me, I feel like compelled to speak by something internal. And I've even debated this with somebody who challenged me very rudely, but I took her up on a debate on Heterodork's podcast. I think there's even an argument to be made that for those of us who are intellectually driven or who have a creative streak or who have just very active minds, that it's better to have an outlet than to just be therapists because we don't want to take it out on our clients. I mean, some people would say that if you're a therapist, you should only be a therapist because if your clients see you expressing yourself in a certain way, it could do harm to them in whatever context. And there's certainly a case to be made there, a conversation to be had. But I think the other side of the story is that knowing myself and just the way that I am and how like intellectually driven I am and what a like just kind of creative type of person I am, if I don't have an outlet where I'm just free to explore ideas and challenge people's ideas and if I don't have that outlet, the risk is that it plays out through the countertransference and I take things out on my clients that really aren't appropriate for them. So I think there's a case to be made as well as a therapist for living a full life and pursuing self-actualization, because otherwise we're at risk of sort of the same thing that, well, you know, that kind of cliche about teachers where it's something like those who know how to do things do them, those who don't teach, like, right,
Mhm.
sort of putting down teachers that it's not an exact analogy, but I think therapists, depending on your leaning, you know, there are certain schools of thought that place a lot of emphasis on the fulfillment of human potential, like, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Adler, like Rogerian, right? And so I think there's sort of a case to be made too that the best therapists are those who have also independently of their therapeutic work pursued their self-actualization, which doesn't mean that therapeutic work can't also be a part of that. It could be that, like, who you are at your core is somebody who is very gifted as a therapist. But anyway, I don't know if that answers your question. I think it's easy though, I think, for therapists to become almost like too self-scrutinizing to the point of
Mm.
um, you know, an emphasis on moral purity that doesn't really necessarily serve anyone.
Mm.
And another thing I will say, just to play devil's advocate, is that it's okay to have shadow motivations. And by that, I mean, like, it's okay. So let's say that there's like a habit that you want to quit, right? We all have bad habits. Some of them are more destructive than others. Um, Now, it would be nice if the idea of I'd like to be a better person, you know, a better parent or more physically fit or, you know, whatever, I'd like to be better, if that were enough of a motivation to quit your bad habit. And sometimes it is, and that's wonderful. But sometimes the thing that really gets a person to quit their bad habit is self-loathing, right? And it's like we give that a bad rap. We were like, shame. Oh no, not shame. Shame is the worst thing ever. Like, let's not let anyone feel it. And it's like, maybe we've gotten too soft. Maybe it's okay to get fed up with your own BS and be like, I hate this about myself and I'm ready to be done with it. I can do better than this. You know, that sort of fierce energy has the power to break through things and make changes. So I think it's okay to be sick of your own BS. And I don't know how I got here, actually. I just feel like I'm rambling. It's been a long week.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. That you can't have completely pure intention. It's a matter of rectifying the intention over time, recognizing that, uh, okay, yeah, I'm partially motivated by these lesser intentions, but what I want to do is strive for the good, and I want to have that intention. I'm curious to know, why is it that you don't want to grow your podcast anymore at this point?
Well, oh yeah, I had been starting to talk about that. So what I've learned is that um, we all need a certain amount of money to live, right? And as therapists, we have the potential to make a decent living. As an influencer, and I put that in air quotes. Okay, let me put it this way. I would say a significant majority of therapists have the potential to make a decent living. Only a small minority of influencers have the potential to make a decent living, right? And those who do can get rich. But um, there are so many people, for many reasons, not all of them completely ego driven, right? But there are many people for many reasons striving to have some degree of influence. And that doesn't mean that influencer is a term that I particularly love or identify with myself. But you know what I'm saying? People who are internet personalities, they have a podcast, a blog, a book, a whatever, you know, social media presence. And I do. I have a social media presence. I have a podcast that's fairly popular for just being something organic that I started from scratch. Um, Anyway, it takes a lot of work to make those things profitable to the point where the amount of money you're getting per hour that you're putting in comes anywhere in the ballpark of the amount of money you make per hour just doing therapy. Right? So what I realized is that I was sacrificing time spent doing actual therapy. Like I was trying to keep my therapy hours limited to make room for all these other things, to make room for my podcast, to make room to represent the film, and to make room for honestly just the enormous volume of email that comes in and
Mm.
DMs and things when you reach this kind of level of micro celebrity that I'm at, which is, I would say, a very awkward level. I would not recommend to any individual. Having 30,000 Twitter followers and 10,000 monthly downloads on your podcast or whatever is a very awkward amount of attention for one individual to manage.
Mm.
And so I was paying, support teams to do things that didn't necessarily generate income just to help me keep up with the amount of work it felt like was on my shoulders. And I'm still there now at this place of burnout and overwhelm. And I'm realizing like, I just need to see more clients, like so yeah, I don't want to grow because I mean, while my podcast is starting to become lucrative, what I realized from my little dalliance with being a so-called influencer, and again, it's not the term I would choose, but it's the one that's most familiar to people, is that it's like not worth it. But so I have to come back to what motivation makes it worth it, and it is that there is at the end of the day still that drive to connect with other people and self-express and to have a meaningful impact. And so I'm not going to give it up, but I just think that in terms of the amount of energy you put into something versus what you get back from it, the accusations that someone like me is a grifter are like pretty funny once you look at the numbers of like how much money I could make if I was just seeing clients and not worrying about all this stuff compared to the work it takes to have a successful podcast.
Mm. So I heard about you through the bird kids memes.
Oh.
That, that was hilarious. I showed my friends. I noticed that you used James Lindsay's technique of cutting humor. I don't know if that was
Mm,
intentional or not,
that
but
would be the metal element in his. Do you do the five elements video?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. Yeah. Uh, so at that point, it does seem like, uh, yeah, you're going more on the offensive, being
Mm.
creative and how to spread the truth and wake people up, bring people out of the cave. Uh, any other? How did that idea come to you? And do you have a sort of vision for how to any more ideas?
Yeah, I just go through bursts where I'll have like a particular creative burst, and so there was like a week or two. It was a few months ago at this point that I I think where it started was I saw memes other people made. I think I saw the one that said kids know when they're ready to drink and drive. And it had like a picture of like a 4-year-old. Um, and it might have been just that one that I saw at first, or there was maybe one other in that same genre that someone else made. And and that inspired the first one I made was would you rather have a smoker child or a dead child? And it showed a girl, maybe 9 years old, looking very angry and mean, like holding a cigarette and kind of like hiding from her parents. And so that was to make fun of the would you rather have a trans child or a dead child narrative, which we know is coercive and misleading, right? So to shed light on it is, well, kids will kill themselves if you don't give them cigarettes, right? Like if we were all spreading that message as a culture, then certainly you would have impressionable teenagers threatening suicide if you didn't give them cigarettes because they are impressionable and malleable you know, and kids tend to go through phases where they present in very immature ways. So I think it started off with that. And then I just kind of got on a roll where I discovered a pretty quick and easy way to make memes, and about like 20 ideas came to me in a week or two. And so yeah, I mean, there's times where I do kind of go on the attack, poking holes in things, and just hope that the backlash isn't too terrible. I did hit a wall when there was a Fox News article about my memes that I did not appreciate because the reporter I spoke to did not let me know that this was going to be a both sides article. She just said she wanted to do an article about my memes. So she didn't inform me about the other side quotes that she would be using. And I don't know if she actually spoke to someone or if she was just pulling things off of a website, but the whole article ended with like something about how like these kids will kill themselves if they're not affirmed. And I didn't get a chance to actually respond to that claim, which makes me look wildly irresponsible. The news article looks like, oh, here's this like person who's a therapist who's like making fun of trans kids, and look, she's causing suicide, right? So I got very upset about that, contacted Fox News, never heard back. And that was, I think, where I reached my point of burnout. So I go through phases, right? Like phases of activism or not caring so much about the consequences of my self-expression because it feels important. And then phases where it just feels not worth it. But yeah,
Well, I'm
I do
sorry.
think that we all need some comic relief, though. And a lot of people got that from the memes, and they felt seen and validated, and they felt like I was exposing issues in a way that they needed to be exposed by drawing absurd analogies through satire.
Yeah, yeah, it is very effective. Picture tells a thousand words, and I'm sorry about that irresponsible journalism. Just another bit of adversity you faced.
Thank you.
So, would like to hear about some of the adversity you faced, what you've done to overcome it, what you'd advise someone who's going through a similar situation.
Honestly, I haven't had a chance to talk about this yet, but it's coming to mind right now. Friendly fire is the worst.
Mm.
Like, because
Struggle safe.
you can anticipate certain types of haters. You can anticipate trans rights activists that they're just going to distort everything you say and call you names. And with that, it's easy to start to develop somewhat of a thick skin for that sort of thing because it's very predictable and it's kind of easy to dismiss out of hand. It's like, well, these are people who are indoctrinated into a belief system, and these are the same people who might be needing my help 5 or 10 years from now. So it's like, forgive them for they know not what they do sort of moment, right? I think the hardest thing for me about being a public figure who is periodically and in unpredictable ways attacked and criticized on the internet is the friendly fire. I mean, the other hardest part is the fact that people have made threats against my license, which I've fought against and won, but there's always that sense, oh, like, when is it going to happen again, right? Although it was heartening that my board released a statement in a newsletter recently saying that they received complaints about licensees based on social media content, and they felt this was a good time to reiterate their policy about the limits of what they will police. So that was refreshing that my board was willing to take a stance and say we're not, as long as someone's not like, airing private health information on social media or like attacking clients online, like, we're not going to tell people how they're allowed to express themselves during their free time. So I appreciated that. But I would say
Yes.
the other hardest thing has been friendly fire. And maybe this is something you can relate to in your personal life. And I've just had another instance of it come up recently. I would say the quickest way to aggravate me or to lose my trust or respect or friendship is to attack me on the basis of my profession, based on you not liking something I did when I was not your therapist, right? So, so what I mean by that is, so I like an interaction on social media recently where someone had made a comment about how step parents are so bad, and I said, like, that's harsh. I'm sorry that you had a bad experience with your step parents, but as a step parent myself, like, we were vilified and scapegoated despite the fact that we sacrificed to raise other people's children. And then she came back and said, you're harsh. And especially for a therapist, this is lacking in empathy. That is exactly the way to get under my skin, right? For somebody who's not my patient and who is under, who I'm under no contractual obligation to, when I'm engaging in my free time, whether it's friends, family, online acquaintances, colleagues, whatever, to say, you're not a good therapist because you don't fulfill my expectation of how you should be performing in this role, right? So there's a lot of projection there. There's like this expectation that because I'm a therapist who is also a person who's on social media, that my role on social media should be to just be the source of unconditional positive regard and empathy and mirroring and validation. I should always put other people's perspectives first, that if this person makes this negative comment about step parents, I should respond as if I were a therapist to that rather than responding as if I'm a step parent, like I wear many hats, right? And step parents are vilified and we are at risk of burnout. And I'm actually reading a book on it right now, Step Monster, which is pretty good. So, and I've had things like that happen with friends who I went out of my way to help. And then when I didn't help them enough or in the exact way that they had fantasized I would, then they tell me I'm a bad therapist, you know? I'm like, how the hell do you know how I perform in that role? You know? So that's really aggravating. And I will say, like, that social media itself is just such a risk factor for burnout, and for stress, and it's such a double-edged sword because it's been such a valuable tool at the same time. And I do like to engage online and be part of an intellectual community and share information that I think will be valuable to others. And I use Twitter X a lot to track what's going on with detransitioners and medical ethics issues. But I think another thing that's been really hard is just that the volume of email I receive, there's like, it kind of dulls my senses and overwhelms my plate to the point where it makes it hard to keep in touch with friends. That's a really hard thing, you know? And then between that and the fact that I've had people who I thought were friends who then got mad at me because I wasn't being their therapist in a way I didn't know I'd signed up for, you know, you add together all of that and it just becomes pretty overwhelming. I feel like this is a therapy session for me. What did you drag me into, Johan? I'm like pouring my soul out to you, but we're recording a podcast.
So you're telling me that you don't give all your friends informed consent to be your friend?
Uh, Maybe that's what I need to do. I need to have people sign a waiver. I mean, I feel like I try to put disclaimers on like everything I put out into the universe, like whatever my pinned tweet is and things like that, like about the, you know, the limits of what people can expect from me. But it's weird being, you know, just someone still in my own midlife, going through learning life lessons, figuring out my own issues, but having been recognized not only as an expert, but having like this savior complex projected onto me, right?
Mhm.
And then being put on this pedestal and this kind of expectation that Stephanie has all the answers. It's a weird place to be. Like, I'm only 38 years old. Like, I gotta, you know, maybe by the end of life, I'll be like a source of perfect wisdom and will like, you know, dissolve into the ethers and like become one with the divine light or something like that. But, you know, I got a long ways to go.
I'm very skeptical personally about how psychologically healthy social media is. I'm not sure I see it as a game that's winnable. I deleted all my social media after college. Recently started a little bit with some assistance, just for the kind of business side of things. But I don't think I'd be capable of reading all the, even like just simply seeing these posts, um, and certainly not negative posts, you know, because we just as humans, we feel, at least maybe I should just speak for myself, kind of compelled to respond or defend myself or, you know, wonder why they're saying what
Mm-hmm.
they're saying. And who knows how much thought has been put into those posts. I mean, you have a intellectual interest, but those social media is, it's not super conducive to a high level intellectual conversation, right?
Yeah, I mean, it just brings out the worst in people. There's a lot of black and white thinking, a lot of jumping to conclusions, and yeah, I mean, the amount of strangers I've encountered who, based on, you know, 200 words, will just come at you with this whole assessment about your entire personality. It can be very toxic in that regard. I mean, I block and mute easily, and often because I'm trying to filter my experience, and sometimes I even have to mute certain, you know, I follow a lot of detransitioner accounts, but sometimes I see them going through stuff and it's like I can't help them with this right now. Like, they're decompensating in public online, and so sometimes I even mute that just because it's
Mm-hmm.
so sad to witness. I'm trying to follow detrans issues and raise awareness, but even that's tough too, because another problem with social media is that it's not context dependent, and all human communication is contextual. Some cultures and situations are more contextual than others, but when you're just putting general messages out there, whether through social media or having a blog or podcast where your audience could be anybody, um, you know, with detransition especially, it's so tricky because I feel like there are certain things I would say to detransitioners, and there's other things I would say about detransitioners. And that's not to reflect dishonesty or a lack of integrity. It's that I would never like the message that I want to drive home to people who are not detransitioners is I want to tell them how much detransitioners are suffering. I want to tell them how bad it is. I don't want to tell detransitioners that. They already know that. I want to give them hope and compassion, right? So even being somebody who is not a detransitioner, who is an advocate and vocal about detrans issues, I have had conflicts with detransitioners. Why? Because it's all online and it's not context dependent, right? They're like, we don't want to be called mutilated or butchered. And it's like, I get it. I would not call you that if we were just sitting down to dinner. You know, I wouldn't be like, hey, how are you? You're mutilated. Like, no, it's not, you know. But would I call a surgeon a butcher? Or would I say to my colleagues, hey, some of these people feel mutilated, permanently damaged, you know, like it's the communication needs to be context dependent. And yet, here I am, like having half of my life be extremely context dependent, which is therapy and my personal life, you know, where it's very relational. And then also navigating being a public figure where I'm talking to an audience of God knows how many anonymous people from different walks of life, and they're all interpreting something meant for one context through a very particular lens, and just it makes way for terrible communication. It's like no wonder our young people are so socially and emotionally delayed right now. They're spending so much time online. They're not learning how to code switch, read between the lines, you know, develop a sense of subtlety. And then that leads to this idea that you have to be your whole self everywhere, right? Which is a lot of pressure and not actually feasible, which makes people more fragile and more vulnerable.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's highly problematic. I'm really, yeah, I'm in the midst of questioning whether I want to have a social media presence. It sounds like, would you say overall it's done more good than harm for you?
There's no way of knowing that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I would have a successful podcast without social media. There's a lot of people I wouldn't have met without it. There's a lot of things I wouldn't have learned. But my life would probably also be a lot less stressful. And maybe I would have accomplished more deep work. You know, like I mean, people are always asking me, when are you going to write a book? I'm like, when I have some kind of windfall that allows me to take a year off from everything, like, you know, like I don't have time to do that type of deep work. My life is just like one meeting after another. So, yeah, I think maybe if I did a complete fast from social media, I would lose some podcast followers and I would be not connected to some of the news and I would, you know, lose touch with certain people, but maybe I would actually be able to focus on things that are deep and meaningful in their own way that require a certain amount of solitude and quietude.
Yeah. It sounds like right now you're at the limit of what one person can do, and maybe with some help. And you're kind of deciding like, what's the next, what was the next phase? You know, do I take a different tack? Do I do some deep work? Or do I just you know, kind of continue where I am right now? But I can see that you're a person with a lot of talents and someone who has high ideals, and I think you are impacting a lot of people. I think you can impact even more once you find that tack.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about the documentary that looked pretty interesting. You helped produce that, I believe.
Yeah, so the documentary is called No Way Back, The Reality of Gender Affirming Care. It can be found at nowaybackfilm.com. You can also order DVDs on Amazon. And you can use my promo code at nowaybackfilm.com. You can use my promo code, some therapist, for 20% off. So I'm really blessed and honored to have been a part of this. It's a documentary on detransitioners from a very compassionate perspective. So we follow the stories of 5 detransitioners from basically childhood through adolescence, through when they were first exposed to this idea that you might be the opposite sex and that might be the reason that you've always felt all these things that you felt, and then this will be the solution to your problems. And then through the, you know, the phase of euphoria to the time where it all fell apart for them. And then we look at the underlying issues that went untreated and unaddressed. And then we look at how did things get here. So I was fortunate to be featured along, you know, several other noteworthy therapists in this field, like Sasha Ayad and Lisa Marciano, Stella O'Malley. And then we have, Dr. Lisa Littman, we have Dr. Michael Biggs, Dr. Julia Mason, Dr. William Malone. So we have basically several physicians, therapists, sociologists, journalists, Lisa Sellen Davis, and Jennifer Bullock. I'm sure there's some people I'm leaving out, but basically starting with the detransitioners and then talking to the experts to find out, how did we let this happen to people? What happened in the field of therapy? What happened in medicine? Is there any evidence base for this? Spoiler alert, there's not. um, and and then sort of some some guesswork around like what is motivating all of this as well. But we try to stay apolitical and compassionate and focus on the people who have been harmed. It's a really excellent medical ethics documentary, and I would say if someone is new to the issue and open-minded and they're willing to devote an hour and a half to learning, this is probably one of the best ways that they could possibly learn about the issue. So we really want to encourage anyone who can to watch it. And sometimes people ask, how can we get this for free? But I want you to think that we have some very hardworking people behind the scenes who have poured their blood, sweat, and tears and their own personal income into this film. So please go ahead and support the film and just make a purchase on our website.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, it sounds like a great thing that's for discussions with people who maybe come from a different background. Because when you're able to show something, it's kind of more objective. It's not me telling you this. It's, hey, let's watch this third party, and then we can discuss our impressions on it.
Yeah, and it's pretty liberal in tone, It's not anti-gay. There's unfortunately a lot of people who still believe that the LGBTQ is one unified community, which again, spoiler alert, it's not. And who think that anyone who opposes gender ideology or opposes transing vulnerable people is anti-gay, and we're not. So I think this film, it's a good alternative to some of the more conservative documentaries that have come out on this topic.
Good point. Anything else that would be helpful to talk about or you'd like to share?
Yeah, I don't know. It's the end of a long week for me, and I'm just hoping I didn't say anything too personal. I wonder if my experience of being a guest on your show is what it must feel like to be a guest on my show, because I kind of feel like you put me in the patient seat a little bit, and I like opened up about my own stuff. I've had a few guests on my show that like made me feel that way. People who are very experienced therapists, where I'm like, oh wait, we're talking about my stuff now. How did that happen? So yeah, I hope I didn't share anything too personal, but it is at the same time kind of refreshing to just kind of stop and reflect on where I'm at this particular point in my life. And I understand that one of the aims of your show is to highlight people who have leadership qualities and values that they aspire to live by. And, I hope that by being vulnerable in this way that I've shed somewhat of a light on the inner experience of someone who's definitely still in the middle of a long chapter of life and just kind of figuring things out as I go.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, I think it's super encouraging for people like myself who are going through this and seeing that, hey, the people who stand up for the truth, they're also human. The people who historically have shed their blood for the truth, they were human. They were made out of the same stuff that we're made out of, and somehow we have to find that motivation if we want the next generation to have a better life than we have.
It's really true. I had a colleague who, one of many colleagues I'm in touch with online. We've never met in person, but he recently kind of finally got to the place where he felt emboldened to speak out on this issue as well. And he said that knowing that I was burnt out and struggling with chronic illness was part of the reason, because I've had a few people say things like that to me. They're like, you shouldn't have to do this all yourself, Stephanie. Like, you have your own limits. So,
Yeah.
yeah. But I think that way that we tend to put certain people on pedestals. First of all, I do not like being on a pedestal because I know full well that like the easiest place to go from a pedestal is crashing down onto the floor and shattering. Like that's a precarious location to be, and a lonely one. Um, but there is that kind of human tendency to have these godlike figures, celebrities that we just kind of we look up to them in this kind of archetypal way, and project things onto them. But once you get your hands dirty, once you actually like get in the ring and start taking risks, you realize that. And you also, like, another thing I found is that the people who have that kind of dichotomy in their mind of like, there are stars who have no human emotions, and then there's the rest of us, like, they are often kind of lacking in self-scrutiny or self-reflection regarding any like moral failings on their own part, or how, and it's the people who have gotten their hands dirty that I've found to be so much more compassionate. Like, I've talked to so many people who have been through their own version of character destruction, and where I've been nervous that, because I've had a few people really go after my reputation, and I've been nervous, like, oh, did they say something about me to so and so? And then I like talk to so and so, and they're like, that sucks. I'm sorry. I know what that feels like. And I don't have a moral purity test, and so it's the people who are really creating stuff too that also understand how much work goes into making the imperfect products that we make as content creators. Like, and once you've had your own experience of creating, whether it's writing a book or launching a podcast or whatever it is, like, you're so much less quick to judge other people, because you know what it takes to put yourself out there and to refine your art and to take those risks and to bring something to fruition.
It's not the critic that counts, as Teddy Roosevelt would say.
Mm.
But you make a really good point about not putting people on pedestals. I think that really bears emphasizing that ultimately it's a mistake to put our trust in any human being. Um, well, can you just remind us where we can find you?
Yep. So my name again is Stephanie Winn, Winn, and my handle everywhere is Some Therapist. I'm most active on X, formerly known as Twitter. I actually made a calculated decision recently to just not put any energy into Instagram, because I was actually paying someone to create content. I'm like, why? I'm spending money just to have a presence on a social media site I don't use. So yeah, I'm mostly on X at Some Therapist. My website is sometherapist.com. That will take you to my blog, my bookshop. People often ask me for reading recommendations. They're all there in my bookshop. I also have wellness products with affiliate codes. And of course, you can find my podcast there. My podcast is You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist. That's found everywhere podcasts are found, and on YouTube. And then for our film, No Way Back, The Reality of Gender Affirming Care, which I may or may not have mentioned was formerly known as Affirmation Generation. You can find that again at nowaybackfilm.com, and you can use my promo code SOMETherapist to take 20% off. You can also find it on Amazon on DVD. And I think that just about covers it.
Well, without putting you on a pedestal, I want to say I really appreciate what you do and wish you all the best with it.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.